Joining us now, member of the Intelligence and Homeland Security Committees, Republican Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma.
I have the first question, and it's an important question. The Orange Bowl, how's it going to end, my man? Alabama, Oklahoma.
It is absolutely going to end with an Oklahoma win.
Oh,
they are due.
Really?
And as you know,
Okay,
Joe,
Senator,
you know
thank
very
you for
well,
joining us.
Oklahoma is ahead of Alabama when Alabama and Oklahoma play head-to-head. So we'll keep the series ahead for Oklahoma.
All right, leave it there.
No, I will say, Willie, Oklahoma has had our number a good bit in the past.
They've got a great quarterback, but Alabama may score 90 points on them.
You know what? Listen, I'll be happy if we just get a field goal. I'm being Bear Bryant now. We're probably going to lose by 60 points, but you know what? If we get a field goal against this scrappy Sooner team, I'll be happy.
This sounds familiar.
You know what? It'll be a good game either way. Looking forward to it.
It's going to be a great game. So let me ask you, you've always been a straight shooter, and we've really respected you so much for it. There have been some people that have been suggesting that General Flynn was entrapped and he was a dupe. He didn't know what he was doing when he lied to the FBI. Do you agree with those people, or are you more on the side of the judge from yesterday?
So I would tell you, I wasn't in the courtroom yesterday, as you had previous guests to be able to talk about that directly. But General Flynn, I don't think had some kind of malicious intent in it. What's interesting is kind of the evolving story from the FBI through the course of it, where initially it was he came in, he gave us nebulous answers, but I'm not sure there was anything malicious, to now shifting to he lied to us, it's time to be able to prosecute, to he cooperated with us, and now it's time to be able to let him off. So at the end of the day, I have no question that General Flynn was talking to the Russian ambassador, that he was trying to engage him and to be able to say, you know, go easy on America, basically. Don't respond back to us harshly based on these sanctions, and trying to talk him down during that time period. He should have been honest with the FBI, should have been honest with the White House. That's why the White House fired him a month into his job.
One more question on this. I just want to make sure, and then we'll move on. But you do think that General Flynn lied to the FBI, right?
I do.
That's what you'd call a leading question. Okay, we can now move on. Let's talk about a criminal justice reform. It looks like peace is broken out for at least an hour or two. What are your thoughts on criminal justice reform and how it came together?
So very bipartisan cooperation on this. This was about 8 years in the making. This was not some random piece thrown together. It's had a lot of different iterations. It's gone through a lot of different changes. And it does some very basic things, some very minor sentencing reforms where there's some conflict in the previous law to be able to turn it. It deals with a lot of bipartisan cooperation. When you've got a Mike Lee and a Dick Durbin working together to be able to pass a bill. One section of it, called the Mercy Act, is something that Cory Booker and I had worked on together, dealing with juveniles in solitary confinement. You deal with issues about ladies that are pregnant that are in prison, and how do you be able to manage some of those things. You also deal with the rebalancing of crack cocaine and powder cocaine, which was resolved in law 10 years ago, but was never resolved in sentencing for those who are under a heavier sentence for crack cocaine than they are for powder cocaine. So it goes back to look at that. So there's a lot of positive things here. The key thing that came out of it, really, though, is to try to be able to move from prisoners just being isolated in prison away from society, which they've committed a crime, they need isolation, but gives them the opportunity for rehabilitation. If they want job training, if they want an option to be able to reconnect closer to family and to be in a prison closer to their family so they can stay connected, if they want opportunities for for help in their drug rehabilitation, all this provides those incentives to actually go through that and hopefully have less recidivism.
David Ignatius, jump in.
Senator, your committee issued two remarkable reports this week about Russian interference in our political life, more detailed than anything that I've seen. I just was curious what you take away from those reports, and in particular, given that the reports know that a theme of Russian disinformation in the U.S. has been to devalue, question the Mueller investigation of Russian meddling, whether the White House has sometimes fallen into what's basically a Russian PR line here. Do you worry about that?
Well, what we have lived with for a long time, the American people have seen now in these reports that we put out. So these are issues we've dealt with for the last 2 years now. no question that the Russians were trying to use social media to try to be able to stir up controversy in the United States. This started in 2014, where they actively were building pages to try to build following because they were already looking to be able to target the election. And I think a couple of things come out in the report very clear. One is they were actively very engaged in the campaign and got prepared very early. And the second one is they tried to find any topic in American life that was divisive and to be able to engage and try to stir up the pot with that. They actually had more posts after the election than they even had before the election, and they were looking for issues like immigration, gay marriage, racial issues, the election, obviously. Anything that they could find that was divisive, they drove that topic as much as they possibly could and were as divisive as they possibly could on that to try to stir Americans against each other.
Casey Hunt?
Senator Lankford, good to see you. I want to ask you about this looming potential shutdown, but Mitch McConnell did say yesterday that he is convinced that the government will not shut down. I'm wondering, do you share his confidence in the president's willingness to sign potentially a short-term continuing resolution if you send him one? And how did Republicans convince him that this Trump shutdown was a bad plan?
Casey, I don't know yet from the White House what their plan is on a continuing resolution. Any shutdown that occurs, obviously, would be very much smaller than what has been done in the past. As you know, about 75% of the government's already funded through the entire year. We're dealing with the final 25% of some of the issues that are still big issues, but not like national defense and health care and all the other things that are already fully funded at this point. I think there will be a continuing resolution that will be passed either today or tomorrow that will fund the government for several months and to be able to punt this into next year, and I find that exceptionally frustrating. We have the appropriation bills done at this point. We've worked through the process. We've had bipartisan support through the committees. We've conferenced these, and I think we should be able to resolve it this year rather than try to punt it into next year. Part of the challenge that we have right now is Nancy Pelosi's not in a position to be able to negotiate on this. She's not Speaker, doesn't want to negotiate this until after she's already Speaker, and so that's locking us up with dealing with anything in the House. And I would tell you the president's very strong on border security issues, and he wants to be able to see border funding in any way in border security that he can get it. Those two forces are impassable at this point.
Senator Lankford, it's Willie Geist. You just came back from a trip over the weekend to Afghanistan to visit the troops and assess the situation on the ground there. It's been, as you know, a deadly couple of weeks and months, actually, for Americans. Taliban claiming credit for these attacks that have killed a number of Americans on the ground in Afghanistan. As you were there, how do you articulate to the American people what we're doing there 17 years on now since this war began?
Yeah, the challenge that we have is a lot of Americans have forgotten why we were there. The war came to us. We didn't go to it.
Right.
Initially, the attacks of 9/11 came out of Afghanistan, and the push into Afghanistan was to try to deal with al-Qaeda, who brought the attack to us. The Taliban was their partner in that, and our focus is twofold right now. We still have a counterterrorism focus because ISIS in the Khorasan is very strong in Afghanistan, and al-Qaeda is still very present and strong in Afghanistan. So we have a clear focus to be able to keep the battle there rather than letting them come back to the United States.
Right.
And the second thing is try to get a stable government in Afghanistan that they can push off these terrorist groups out of their own country.
But
now,
Senator,
we'd like to see
have we been trying to get
reconciliation.
that government for 17 years? In other words, what gives you hope that there'll suddenly be a stable government in Afghanistan?
So there are some breakthroughs that are happening in negotiations trying to be able to get the Taliban and the existing Ghani government to be able to sit down and do reconciliation. That's been a stronger focus in the past year to try to get reconciliation between the two. The Taliban, some people see them as a terrorist organization, more like a big political party in Afghanistan that clearly has some very strong militant elements in it. So the focus has been able to isolate the militant elements and to be able to remove them from the battlefield, and those that want to actually engage in reconciliation to be able to get that part of the Taliban to be able to sit down with the Ghani government to be able to find reconciliation. They have presidential elections scheduled for May of coming up for next year. There are some transitions that are coming. So there are some moments for reconciliation now that haven't been there in the past, and it gives us some great optimism to try to get that done.
Just quickly, Senator, sorry. So do you see an end date to this war? In other words, do you see a day in the foreseeable future where there are not Americans on the ground in Afghanistan?
No, let me answer that two ways. I do see an end to the war, but I don't see an end to a day when we don't have some American basing there. Just like we have an American base, a joint base in Honduras, fighting counter-narcotics in that area and doing disaster relief, that is still there, has been there for a long time. I see long-term there being some basing in Afghanistan, continue to fight off the terrorism threat coming from that region. But as far as an active battlefield, trying to be able to resolve the issues with the government, I do see an end date coming on that where there's not an ongoing fight there. But basing, I think, will be necessary long-term to protect our own national security.
You said just like Honduras, also, obviously, just like Germany and just like
Japan.
South Korea, Japan. Sometimes it's just an absolute necessity. Senator James Lankford.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you so much. And
you bet. Thanks, y'all.
Roll Tide.
Go Sooners.